Afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Digital Transformation Thursdays. It's 4 p.m. I'm JJ DCini, the managing partner of the DCini Law Office. As you know, we are organizing this series of free webinars to celebrate our 20th year. And we hope you're safe wherever you're coming from. We know it's been a very hard week for many people. And we ourselves had to cancel or postpone our event last Thursday, which is about the Open Access in Data Transmission Act. We have rescheduled that for next week. So we will have two episodes of DTT next week. One will be on a Thursday, and the other one will be on a Friday, and that's on the Open Access and Data Transmission. That's at 4 p.m. on November 27. So we hope you can join us there. We'd also like to remind you, if you want to receive an e-certificate for attending today's session, you would have to register at the DTT website to the Zoom registration, and then that will trigger us to send you a link where we will ask you to make a small donation in favor of DTT Donate and our COVID frontliners. And we're very happy to announce that we've donated already to our frontliners, particularly to PGH and I think Bahay Molave, here in Silungang Molave, here inside the UP Diliman. And we will be making additional donations. So whenever you attend and you pay for your e-certificate, we're making donations on behalf of that. We're also matching some of those donations. So moving on to the main topic for today. So I think this is a very timely topic because we do find ourselves in the middle of a pandemic, which has forced us to change the way that we work. And as you know, the business processing or the business process outsourcing industry is perhaps the one of the largest drivers for growth in the country. I think if you are a new graduate, you're more likely to find opportunities, not only job opportunities, but also growth opportunities in the BPO sector. And so our guest today is one who has had a long experience in this industry and is well versed to discuss data protection issues that have affected this industry in the past months. Our guest is Attorney John Bellow, and he has been part of the business process outsourcing industry for the last 13 years. As a member of the senior leadership team of one of the biggest BPOs in the world, Alorica, he provides practical legal advice and support in the context of critical business issues, not only in the Philippines, but also in Japan and China. Currently, his in-house legal team is a finalist in the following categories in the Asian Law Business Awards for 2020. Number one for the category of Data Privacy and Protection In-House Team of the Year, and Innovative In-House Team of the Year. So good luck with that. John is an international fellow of information privacy of the International Association of Privacy Professionals, or the IAPP, with internationally recognized certifications on privacy management and European data protection regulations. He is a co-chair of the IAPP's Philippine chapter and chairman of the Security Council of the Contact Center Association of the Philippines. He graduated with honors at the Ateneo School of Law in 1998. So I'd like to welcome Attorney John Bellow. Yeah, John, you need to turn on your, it's a bit of a challenge sample because John is he's not using a Zoom app for security reasons. You have to turn on your camera, John, and then unmute yourself. Okay. There you go. So you can see your slides. So thank you for sharing that. And there we see you. There you go. Thank you.
Good. Thank you so
right.
much, JJ, right? And thank you for the kind introduction, right? So hold on, let's let me.
Very excited to have you here. So I'll
Yeah.
get into it.
Okay, so first things first. No, again, thank you, JJ. Thank you to the Cine law firm for having this kind of weekly um, opportunities or discussions on privacy or data protection. It's very, very important simply because unlike in other parts of the world, like Europe, for example, privacy is an evolution as opposed to us. It's really more of a revolution, right? Or like we talk about running, for them it has been a marathon. For us, it's really more of a sprint. Well, that being said, let me proceed with my presentation on the privacy in the pandemic, lessons learned from the BPO industry, and hopefully I can be able to impart knowledge that you can use, practical knowledge that you can use regardless of the industry where you belong, right? Whether you're a lawyer, IT person, HR person, compliance. So I hope that after this presentation, you'll be equipped with some tips that you can really, really use, right? When you go back to your regular work. Okay, so let's begin. Okay, so I'd like to start first with key concepts on data privacy. So because it's very important for us to some kind of leveling off so that when we talk about examples later on, it will be more interactive and collaborative, right? So let's please bear with me for a while we discuss some key concepts before we move on to the actual scenario in the BPO industry. Now, first things first, we need to understand that the Data Privacy Act and the rules can trace its ancestry to the United Declaration of Human Rights, right? So, and even the NPC would say that the state policy to protect the human right of privacy is rooted to our from in our constitution, and then of course we all know that our Bill of Rights basically, right, is more or less patterned after the United Declaration of Human Rights rather. And if you look at the statement of the Office of the High Commissioner of the United Nations Human Rights, the reason why they have that declaration is to prevent another Holocaust. And if you're familiar with history, is that we all know that the triggers of World War II, which basically be the persecution of the Jews, the appetite of Nazis for more territory, right? And if you look at some investigation, how the Nazis were able to persecute the Jews at the time and other non-Germans, is that they use data from their census, or they use census data, and through the use of census data, they were able to determine where the Jews, who are those who are coming from less inferior races, so to speak, and they will identify the relatives, the family members, so on and so forth. So when they go house to house, they're equipped with information. They know how many members are in the household, right? For example, you have a Jewish family. They know the names, how many are the children, and so on and so forth. They use information, right, for discrimination purposes, and that is why that triggered the Holocaust. And from the words of the human rights activists, especially Europe, never again do they want to go into that situation. So that's why the privacy law in the Philippines, could trace its history or its lineage to that history of Europe, right? And that's why I said a while ago, their European counterparts have been doing privacy in and out, right, for the longest time. That's why it's really more of an evolution compared to us. It's really more of a revolution. Okay, next another set of key concepts. Later we'll be discussing about the processing of health data. So it's very important to understand what types of data are being collected. So if you're familiar, if you have underwent all these tests, rapid tests or swab tests, then you'll be familiar with the case investigation form. If you're an HR person, you'll be familiar with the contact list tracing form and the workplace survey form. So collectively speaking, um, tons of data, no? Tons of data being collected. So I took the opportunity to enumerate what are these data points, right? So everything's here: name, address, date of birth, age, sex, nationality, and so on and so forth. Even the fact that you died is also included in that data. Now, under the Data Privacy Act, you cannot just process health data. It's actually prohibited unless you have a legal basis for processing data. And I could enumerate three, which would be the most practical and appropriate under the situation. You have legal obligation, you have consent, and vital interests. No, definitely of all three, the most reliable would be legal obligation. And you have laws that will allow you to process sensitive personal information like health data. And these are, the mandatory reporting of these notifiable diseases. And of course, the Occupational Safety and Health Standards Act, right? And I would talk about this more later, but using consent is really problematic simply because, especially in the workplace environment, number one, consent has to be freely given, and consent can be withdrawn anytime, right? But more of that later. Next, of course, key concepts would be the what I would call the TLP principles. And you would see these principles in most of the advisories of the NPC when they tackle about how to process personal information. You have transparency, legitimate purpose, and proportionality. But under the law, it would be rearranged as legitimate purpose, proportionality, and transparency. But for me, as a memory aid, I use TLP, like, let's kumbaga, tender love for the Philippines. So that's my memory aid, so I'll never forget, right? TLP. Now, of course, transparency meaning if you're going to process data of the data subject, the data subject should know the hows and whys of the processing, to whom you would be disclosing the data. Right? So in other words, there's no secret between you in the data subject as to how you're processing personal data. It's very important. Legitimate purpose, of course, when you process data, should not be for the purpose which is not contrary to the law, public morals, public policy, right? And lastly, proportionality. You can only be collecting data, right, on the minimum basis. You have to practice data minimalism, so to speak, right? So again, more of that later. Okay, and this is another set of concepts that would be very, very important. Again, you review the advisories of the NPC, and you will be probably encountering these terms, right? So if you process data, you collect, retain data, definitely you have to have security measures in place. It will be technical security measures, organizational, and physical security measures. And you have examples here. In the context of a BPO, for example, what are our useful technical security measures? You have passwords, right? You have access cards. You have antivirus, firewalls. Organization security measures, we have a lot of policies that will be compliant with, let's say, credit card information or health information, and of course, the access control policies, right? So we have those policies in place. And physical security measures, again, in the context of a BPO, we have, if you go to any of our sites, you will see, of course, an army of security guards the moment you enter the premises. Of course, you have CCTVs left and right. So those would just be part of security measures. ID, you cannot enter the premises without an ID or even access card. Even before you enter the elevator, sometimes you will need to swipe your access card so that you'll be allowed to enter the elevator. Now, why do we need this? And this is also in the law. We need these measures in place to ensure there's CIA. If you are from the IT or info, you're part of INFAC, you know this, you know the CIA triad. You have confidentiality of data, integrity of data, and availability of data. These are very, very important terms, and later on we'll again discuss that further. Okay, now what's the goal according to the NPC or according to the Data Privacy Act? Why do we need to implement security measures? To prevent disclosure and unlawful processing. And you will tie that up with confidentiality of data. And prevent alteration. Again, you will tie it up with integrity of data. And prevent accidental or unlawful destruction of data. You can tie that up, of course, with availability of data in accordance with the CIA triad. Next, of course, the threats are real. Why do you have this various security measures in place? Because the danger to the personal data, or of course, the confidential data of the company, of our company, and other BPOs, the threats are real. And what I have here are real examples. For example, hacking. There was this BPO in the Philippines who provided Delta Airlines with a chatbot. Now, the chatbot would allow more of an automated interface with the customers of Delta Airlines. Unfortunately, because of weak password management, somebody was able to hack the system. Somebody was able to get credentials, and they were able to manipulate that software that was installed in the website of Delta Airlines. For that reason, the hackers were able to monitor the information coming in and out of the website, thus compromising the personal information of the customers of Delta. Now, phishing. Last year, I saw this email. This email came to us. It was addressed to one of our executives. It's obviously a phishing email. Somebody pretending to be from the Michigan State, right, government, or yeah, Michigan State, saying that, hey, we will probably have a complaint. Click this link, you will see the complaint. Of course, our executive did not click the link, and they referred it, of course, to the data privacy team and InfoSec team for evaluation. Definitely, by looking at itself, it's really more a phishing email, right? So the problem with the phishing, definitely, and you must be aware of this. If you click this link, there must be opportunity to put ransomware in the system, right? So that will be affecting the availability of data. Okay, malicious insider. Of course, the profile will be somebody who's really had the intention of getting information from you and then selling it outside of the company. And this is not only common in the BPOs, there'll be those also in any kind of industry. But let's have an example, right? A malicious side, a more concrete example. If you're aware of the data breach that happened affecting, I think it was Capital One, they put information in the cloud. They use Amazon Web Services. And unfortunately, there's this disgruntled Amazon Web Service employee. She discovered the misconfiguration in the firewall of Capital One, and she exploited that hole, and for which reason she was able to access the data of Capital One. Okay, human error. Well, recently I attended the Private Summit of the NPC, and this is the BPO Privacy Summit. It was mentioned by the NPC that the breach reports, that the breaches reported to it from the BPOs would really be 64% of which would be due to human error, such as email mistakes. And I understand that even law firms would this would just happen with among the BPOs. It would happen in any industry. Even law firms. In fact, there's a Singaporean law firm. I think that happened last year. Somebody from the law firm emailed by mistake several people, and unfortunately, there were some personal data of their client contained in that email. Right? I don't think this is also common in the Philippines as well. Okay. So now that we've discuss the concepts, right? The TLP principles, the security measures, the reason why we have the Privacy Act to begin with, and also the situation and how to, in the pandemic, specifically the processing of sensitive personal data. Now, let's discuss the pandemic situation so far as the BPO industry is concerned. So we all know that on March 16 was the day one of the ECQ, or the Enhanced Community Quarantine. We all know establishments were ordered closed, except for certain industries that are considered essential and entities that were exempted. And among those exempted entities would be the BPOs. However, we were only allowed to have a skeletal workforce. Other employees would be required to work from home. So that resulted to a huge logistical nightmare for the BPO industry. Of course, definitely we're facing on how to continue business, because our business really would be affecting various industries in the world, especially in the US. If we stop servicing those clients, then it will be hard. It will be hard for us to recover again. That's why we were able to convince the IETF to give us some leeway to allow us to operate. And then we also needed, of course, to transfer or transport or deploy rather equipment to our employees. Again, it's a logistical nightmare simply because we have more than 1 million employees involved, right? And that's why, I don't know, if we have relatives from the BPO industry who are production agents, I'm sure they would have some war stories to tell, because some agents would really literally have their desktop with them and their monitor, right, on their laps while they're being transported either by a shuttle, or if they're lucky, if they're able to get into a public use of public transportation. So it was really a logistical nightmare. And not only that, we are, as data protection officers, we're also thinking already about the issues with respect to data security and privacy while we're doing those things, right? Okay, now at the present, we are now on a general community quarantine. Establishments are either partial or fully open, but although BPOs are supposedly fully operational, like any other industries in any other company, you're also required to maintain social distancing of this 1 meter to 2 meters. So in the context of the BPO, that would mean we can only put 50% of our workforce at our sites, and the rest would still be working from home. And that's a limitation, right, imposed by the current status we are in. Okay, for those who are working on site, then that created another set of concerns for us. If we a while ago I mentioned that the transporting and deploying equipment to the various households would will result to certain data security issues. For those who are working on site, has its own set of issues as well, or challenges. Definitely, we are required by law to ensure that we monitor our employees, right, in the workplace. We are required to have temperature checks and to require employees to accomplish survey forms. And then we are also subject to the contact trace activities of the Department of Health and LGUs. At the start of the pandemic, only the Department of Health, the LGUs, were involved in contact tracing. But later on, they delegated that obligation to employers as well. And that is why we're given this contact tracing forms from the LGUs, and we're required to submit that to the LGUs on a almost daily basis. Okay, and of course, this does not only a challenge among BPOs, this is a challenge in various establishments. Okay, if there's somebody in your community or workplace or establishment who is a close contact, suspect, and confirm, then definitely you need to report that to the LGU, right? Okay, and then again, as I mentioned earlier, all these things involve sensitive personal information. Okay, so now we have a dilemma. So you have work from home employees and you have work on site employees. Now the challenges for work from home employees, of course, the data security from the perspective of the confidential information of the company, as well as the client information, and of course privacy risks from the perspective of the employee. Now that, of course, if you talk about working on site, then you have issues on health risks. Why? Because if the LGU sees that your company would have quite a number of infections, then you will face closure. In fact, there already been several BPOs that have been shut down by the LGU because of infections at the workplace. And of course, it will also, when you process health data, would definitely be involved or be faced with challenges with respect to the privacy risk from the perspective of the employees. Again, because you're mainly processing the health data of your employees when you do contact tracing or reporting to the LGUs or even the Department of Health. Now, in this situation, there are employees like me, for example, I can work at the site, I can work at home. But there are employees who in BPOs who are either working from home because when you were recruited, your employment agreement says you will only be required to work from home. And then you have other agents, and these are the people who are in accounts that do not allow their accounts to be serviced outside of the premises. There are those accounts, and there are many of those, right? Especially those that deal with financial information. Many of those would prohibit the servicing of their respective accounts outside of the premises. And for those types of employees, then definitely their activities are limited to the work site, meaning they can only perform work at the work site. So of course, definitely you'll be faced with the hybrid workplaces. That's what we have right now. And before, I noticed this in various business continuity plans I've reviewed in the past. You will be working from home if there's a disaster, etc., typhoon, storm. That's part of BCP plan. But now, because of the privacy risks, data security, and health, as I mentioned, BPOs would be embracing what we call a hybrid workplace. So it's no longer a business continuity concern, but now it has transformed itself to a business model, right? So definitely, the way we treat working from home is different moving forward. Now, just part now of a BPO's business model to have employees working from home versus employees working or limited or only allowed to work on site, especially for accounts that demand that their accounts be serviced on site. Okay, work from home challenges. So as I mentioned earlier, the data security is really a concern when your employees will be working from home. So imagine when you go back, I think we will be sharing the slides to you guys, those who attended this webinar. there are real threats outside, right, of the workplace, and that's why we have all these measures in place. So, for example, this is the workplace. Our employees will be here inside the workplace, right, for our measures to be effective. Now, because of the pandemic, those who usually be covered by security measures already outside, right, outside of the work area. So that's really a big headache for our InfoSec team, for data privacy teams. That's why when we're deploying all those equipment to our employees, we're also reviewing and revising our security policies to ensure that our security policies would cover work from home situations. And those are be part of the organizational measures. Now, technical measures, of course, you have these VPNs and multi-factor authentication as a recommended tool to ensure that the right person is accessing your data outside of the work environment. Or, of course, those who have access to your equipment, to your site, to your account, they should have the right access or authorized to access them. And you can do that through use VPNs and multi-factor authentication. Organizational measures, a while, as I mentioned earlier, we have to revise policies. Then, of course, example of that would be we have to revise them, right? Because the tendencies of employees, especially Filipinos, they're really into social media. So if you issue a computer, let's say to your agent, the person might be tempted to visit various social media sites. That's why, aside from having firewalls in place, definitely you also have to revise your policies to accommodate that kind of situation when even outside, most especially outside of the work area, not because the equipment is outside of the workplace doesn't follow that you can already use it for personal reasons. Doesn't follow, right? So that's why you have to be clear, or you have to revise the policy as an organizational measure. Physical measures, unlike in the workplace, you have CCTVs, you have guards. Now that you have when an agent would have our equipment, we cannot deploy a security guard, right, at the houses of our employees. So that's very impractical. And of course, we will not be able to require our agents to order IDs in the respective homes for obvious reasons. But anyway, there are physical measures, even physical measures, right? Even simple ones, right? Let's say, for example, like I mentioned here, we in our policies, we will be asking the agents to reposition computer screens, prevent shoulder surfing. Right? So this means nobody except for the agent should be allowed to look at the computer screen. You can do it by simply repositioning the computer screens, right? Of course, you can have the to distribute locks, right? So they can lock the computer in place. There are types of there are many physical measures that can be done while in the while in the work from home environment. And some BPOs, what they did is that they also distributed panels, right? Like cubicles. So when you're inside your home, you can have some sort of limited privacy because you have this panels that would shield you and the monitor you're using from your relatives. So this really very peculiar because most BPOs are again not ready for this kind of scenario. In fact, they discourage production agents, or they would not allow production agents to be working from home for obvious reasons, like I mentioned a while ago, for data security reasons. But again, we need to adjust, right? We need to adapt the current situation. That's why we have to have different security measures that will be compliant still, but although in a different a different security environment. Okay, what to deploy? This has been an issue, at least in our BPO at Alorica, there was a discussion, what do we deploy? Do we deploy desktops or do we deploy laptops? Of course, from a shore operations perspective, you want mobility. It will be easier to transport laptops than desktops. It is easier for you to be operational if you're using laptops rather than desktops because of the logistical nightmare involving, because unlike laptops, you have a computer monitor, right, and a PCU, a CPU. And then depends on the model of the desktop, then you have logistical issues. So who will transport that? Will it be the agent or will it be your facilities teams? So there will be considerations in terms of mobility. Now, the problem with laptops, of course, inherent with any mobile equipment, a gadget, it can be easily stolen, right? So definitely, if that's the case, then many BPOs would rather be deploying desktops instead of laptops. In our case, at least at the Lorica, we deployed mostly desktops to our production agents. Number three, and this is also a consideration in terms of having employees working from home. Telecommuting versus strictly working from home. There's a difference. Telecommuting means that you can be allowed to be in alternative workplaces. You could be the house, it could be the office, and definitely you're not prohibited from working in cafes, right? But for purposes of data security, at least for our company and some other BPOs, we have policy in place limiting the work should be done rather in the privacy of the house or the home. Why? Because if you're telecommuting, if you decide to work, let's say in a cafe, and you might be tempted to use the public Wi-Fi. If you're an information security expert or an IT expert, definitely you know there will be red flags already, because of course using public Wi-Fi's are not really safe. So you better remove the temptation from your employees or from the agents. That's why in our case you would rather strictly have the work done at the house rather than allowing the employees to be telecommuting. So there be, of course, not all employees are have this kind of restriction. Me, for example, I can work anywhere because I'm not really, unlike our agents, we're really handling personal data of the client's customers. So it will be different at my end. But of course, I don't use public Wi-Fi, right? Just to put that out there. Okay, asset recovery. So with a million employees out there and more being recruited on a daily basis, there's a lot of attrition happening in the BPOs. We have a lot of employees either being terminated or simply resigning from their jobs. So definitely that will be another consideration. That's another challenge when you use the work from home model, the asset recovery. Well, most luckily, I suppose for the BPO industry, our agents are not allowed to retain personal data in their equipment, right? In their computers. They only because number one, USBs are disabled. They're not allowed to. There are firewalls, right? They're whitelisting, using whitelisting, preventing them from taking out information or transferring them outside of the system. So there are those. So let's say a PC is lost. It will not be problematic because we know that that computer does not contain personal information. Of course, it's a different matter. Let's say if you're an employee is working with the payroll team, and he or she would have access probably to the various social security numbers of the employees, and if she would be saving that in the laptop, then that could be another issue altogether. But be that as it may, asset recovery is a challenge for those working, at least for those employers that have employees working from home, right? Because again, there will be a issue if the equipment is stolen or lost or not returned. Definitely the part of the CIA triad might be affected. Could be confidentiality of data, right? That might be at stake there. Okay, asset integration. So for those employees that who return their equipment, and also in the event that we begin going back to the work site, uh, you will need to consider asset integration at the site. So meaning before you plug in that equipment into the system, make sure that the IT would check it first, right? Because you don't know, there might be a malware there, or it could possible also that the employee have shared the password to another person. That's why that's another tactic you need to do. You have to do a password reset as well. Okay, number 6, and this is very, very important, right? You need to ensure that all your employees will be trained on data security. Now, it's a challenge simply because, we have to be virtual, right? That's why we have to embrace, again, digital transformation. We need to we need to have our training no longer face-to-face, but through micro-learning videos, and to be done virtually. Now, not only that, we also have to update our training modules on data security to again embrace the concept of working from, because of prior to the pandemic, our training materials with respect to data security only envisions data security inside the work area or on site. Then now that when we shifted the workforce, most of the workforce to a work from environment, definitely you have to revise your training materials as well. Security audits. Now this is a challenge because before we conduct security audits face to face, or our auditors would do floor walks, right? With checking if the employee is observing clean desk policy, checking if the computer screen is locked, right? Checking if there'll be sharing of passwords, checking if there'll be paper and pen lying around. But you can't do that now because number one, it's a pandemic, which would limit the movement of employees. That's why you have to use teleconferences and web cameras to conduct this security audits, right? Like now we can do virtual audits by using a web camera. Okay, now productivity monitoring tools. So this is really a problematic, or let's say a problem area for employers, not only among BPOs but to all types of employers out there. There's this press release by the NPC saying that yes, you can have productivity monitoring tools in place for work from home employees. However, you should employ less privacy intrusive means of monitoring. In fact, they said here, the use of tracking mouse movements, recording keystrokes, taking random photos of the computer screen, and enabling webcams to take a picture of the employee might be considered as excessive and disproportionate, right? I think for me, as a data protection officer, this we may need the NPC may need to revisit this one, right? In the light of data security issues. Maybe we can be talking about that later on. Now, what do other experts say about productivity monitoring tools? So there's this data privacy expert. Her name is Debbie Reynolds. So I would encourage everyone to check her out. She's on LinkedIn. She's a great resource. Want to learn more about data protection? I recommend Debbie Reynolds, also known as the Data Diva. And this is what she said about productivity monitoring tools. If the person isn't delivering as an employee, you will know. You don't have to track their eyeballs on the screen to know that. Now, okay, so that's what she said. That's how other experts from other jurisdictions would look at productivity monitoring tools. But then again, let's be clear, it is not prohibited uh, altogether. But what they're saying here is that there could be less intrusive ways to gauge the productivity of an employee. Now, regardless of what tool you will employ, you must conduct a privacy. I recommend that you conduct a privacy impact assessment. Okay, that will be the challenges related to working from home. And now let's talk about the other front, uh, health data processing challenges. So as I mentioned earlier at the start of my presentation, well, you need to make a decision. If you're going to process data, what will be your basis for processing data? Is it legal obligation? Is it consent? Or is it vital interest? Well, why does it matter? Why does it matter? If you look at the various contact tracing forms and health data survey forms that you will see, right? You go to a mall, you go to a restaurant, there is a provision at the end to be accomplished before you put your signature there. I hereby consent to the processing of data by the establishment in compliance with the mandatory reporting law, etc., etc., etc. Now, why is that problematic? Remember, as I mentioned earlier, consent can be withdrawn, right? Consent can be withdrawn at any time. For the employer as well, that's also it's really more problematic for the employer, because in most survey forms I've seen so far in other BPOs, in other companies, they will still have that consent provision. If remember, you're doing contact tracing, then you may not need consent at all, because you can rely on the legal obligation. Now, why is it material? Because remember, as I mentioned earlier, transparency. You have to disclose in your privacy notices statements the basis for your processing. Is it consent or is it legal obligation? But right now, it may not be a serious issue. But just to cite an example, in Europe, there's this audit firm which they have an employee, right, who said, no, I don't want you guys to, I withdraw my consent in the processing of my information. Regardless of the withdrawal of the consent, but still employee, okay? He's still employee of that auditing firm. Even if he withdrew the consent, the audit firm continued to process the data of that person. Now, the Data Protection Authority actually imposed a fine on that employer. Why? Because although although the person withdrew the consent, yes, you may be allowed to process it, but you have to inform the employee on the basis for processing the data, because the basis processing date of the data is not included anymore in the privacy statement of that audit firm. Because earlier, the basis processing is consent. Now that has been withdrawn, what's your basis for processing now? All right. So that was the reason why that firm was fined by that European Data Protection Authority. Okay. 2, health surveys and contact tracing. Again, as mentioned earlier, you really need to master transparency, legitimate purpose, and proportionality principles. So why am I saying this? In terms of legitimate purpose, if you're an employer and your purpose is to perform contact tracing activities at the workplace, would you be collecting the data of the relatives of your employees that were exposed to that employee, or would you just limit yourself to the collection of data of the employees and the employees around that person who were exposed to that person who later turned out to be a COVID infected person, right? So you see where I'm going here. So if your purpose is just that, then definitely you no longer have to, you're not allowed to collect data of the relatives, right? Because they're already out of scope of your purpose, which is to collect data and perform your duties as an agent of the LGU in terms of contact tracing, right, at the workplace. So in terms of proportionality, let's type with proportionality. Now, you perform the contact tracing, when you fill up the contact tracing report, rather, you will, of course, include their data of the relatives of the employee, because it's already excessive if you include that, right? And of course, transparency whenever, hopefully that you already revise your privacy notice or statements to reflect that you'll be collecting data of your employees for purposes of contract tracing. I hope you've done that already. It's really, really important. Okay, number 3, excessive data collection. Again, with the number of employees that we have, more than 1 million employees, and half of them probably reporting for work, and more than, or probably more than 500,000 are required to uh, perform the survey. So then if you be using paper, that will really be hard to manage. So we again shifted from paper surveys to digital health surveys, right? So of course, paperless would probably lessen also cases of infection. That's why in our case, we moved at the very get-go, we moved from paper surveys to digital health surveys. However, we do this in-house. We didn't use a vendor for purpose of health service. If you look at the various establishments you go to in the mall, if you perform digital health survey, you would see that there's a third party that's actually processing that survey on behalf of the establishment, because the more that you share the information, I think it's harder to contain and to control the personal information. It's already excessive already. Then definitely, if you start to share them to third parties, that might lead to a bigger headache, so to speak. Disposal retention. I hope that you know this, that according to the workplace guidelines issued by both the Department of Trade and Industry and the Department of Labor, can only retain health data for a period of 30 days. Okay? And this is probably the last challenge, right, in terms of health data processing of your employees or the workplace, discrimination. I cited one of this. Of course, it's not really more of a workplace scenario, but I think it's very important for us to understand this case. I don't know if you've read this in the newspapers along. Probably this happened in May or March. There's this COVID-19 patient, and he was asked by the LGU, hey, can we disclose? We're having difficulties performing our contact tracing obligations. Is it okay with you if we identify you, make an announcement naming you that you have COVID, and then so we can improve our contact tracing abilities? Of course, then the patient, okay, he said, okay, I'm okay with that, I'm fine with that. So in other words, the person gave his consent. Well, the night after he gave his consent, people started throwing rocks at their house. See, so why am I citing this example? Well, of course, and on its face, they have consent. you can the consent of the patient or the person is there, right? So you have basis for processing the employee's data. You have basis for disclosing. But then again, what I'm saying here, even if you have meeting all these requirements, people still be subject of discrimination, right? So you have to be very, very careful about uh, about your contact tracing activities. And now, for a more in another example, which affected one BPO company, what happened there is that in their company there was a high, not really a high level of infection, but there were some employees were infected with COVID. So the BPOs performed their obligations. They report to the LGU and its health officer that they are the employees that were that can be classified as close contacts of this of the BP employees who were infected. So unfortunately, when this information, if the information was shared to the LGU, the unintended consequences there was that consequence there was that some of the employees were harassed by barangay officials. They were asked if they can go to their facilities for isolation. Or the BP employees said that they refused because why are you doing that? We're not close contacts, the people that you're saying that were infected by COVID. So these employees know they're not part of the contact tracing list. So they said, why are you trying to bring us to the isolation centers? And some of them also reported that, okay, so after the community learned that some of the employees in their workplace have COVID, and they've been identified to be an employee of that BPO, some of them were not allowed to board tricycles and jeeps because they were identified with that BPO company, which had a number of BPO infections. So those are really, let's say, probably unintended consequences of sharing data, especially to the contact tracing activities of employers. So they have to be careful of that one as well. Okay, so last slide. As I mentioned earlier, for the Philippines, privacy is really more of a revolution rather than an evolution. What's problematic, at least from my perspective, that we're still not used to that level of privacy maturity where we want to be. When we compare ourselves with our European counterparts, we have a long way to go. But when COVID-19 happened, then now we're not really used to the privacy of our own, not comfortable, we're not used to having a right of privacy, but we're now getting used to being the subject of surveillance for purposes of public health and data security, right? So getting used to that. The problem there, as one UN expert said, surveillance measures to curb the spread of COVID-19 could cause lasting damage to the right of privacy, which can be abused by authoritarian governments once the threat is over. So imagine that, going back to my example earlier, BPO employees, not even close contacts, were subjected to discrimination by government authorities. Unfortunately. So that's just probably a simple situation. But if we continue to be a subject surveillance, then it might be hard for us to go back to that pre-COVID stage that we have an appreciation of the right to privacy. And hopefully, after the pandemic is over, we can go back, right, to that stage that we can really be aware, familiar, and comfortable with our right to privacy. So with that said, I end this presentation. Okay, so JJ,
All right. Thank you. So I think you need to stop sharing. And so thank
Okay.
you for that, John. So yeah, perfect. Let me see. Let me see if I can change the here. So I guess my well, siguro just I'll do some ano muna. One what do you call this? One of my things that I do usually in before we go to the Q&A, which I just do a shout out to everybody who told us where they're from. You actually have a shout out here on the. I know you're not looking at
Yeah.
the chat, but there's a shout out here from Ed Parocha. He's with the President CEO of Urban Security Agency. Ano, commenting. I don't know if you see that. We also we have people from all over. So from north to south, no. We have someone in from Mariano Marcos Memorial Hospital and Medical Center in Batac, Ilocos Norte. We have someone coming in from Baguio, San Juan, NKTI near here, so National Kidney Center, BGC Taguig, Taguig City, Gentry, General Trias Cavite. We have someone from the HR department of the Sorsogon Provincial Hospital. Welcome. And then we have somebody who said they're coming in from Zamboanga. So I guess we got. I don't think we hit anyone in Visayas, but we're. And then there's somebody from the U.S. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Somebody's watching us from the US. So I thought that
Right.
was interesting. Right.
Right.
So welcome everyone. There's a question here, but
JJ,
yeah,
before you begin the
go
question,
ahead.
I'd like to greet my the Ilocanos out there because I think I mentioned to you earlier before the I began the presentation. I began the before we went live, right? So I'm half
Yeah.
Ilocano. So to my fellow half to my Ilocanos there, thank you so much for for attending this webinar. Okay,
Ayun.
okay, JJ, back to
Okay.
you.
Right, right. No, so I like the what how you ended on the sort of unintended consequences of COVID on contract tracing, because I think that's really the big issue there right now. So personally, I haven't been out, so we're on very strict lockdown here. But I do understand. I've heard from many people that when you go to these public places, either there's an app on your phone or you fill out a sheet of paper and you give information about yourself. And if all that data is connected to each other, then that can create a contact tracing footprint, so to speak, for an individual, and can be used. Uh, and it's interesting you mentioned about the person where his house is being rocks were thrown at the house of a person who was diagnosed positive, no, as being COVID positive. And I don't know if you've seen the those pictures that have been going around social media where people have these signs made. Congratulations, JJ Dicini, for being COVID negative, right? RT-PCR test and all that. So I was asking somebody. I said this seems to be a phenomenon that we're seeing in the provinces. And one of our associates kasi had gone back. She's up there in Kalinga right now. And I said, have you seen those signs? And she said, yes. And I said, why do people make those signs? It's precisely for that reason, so that people won't throw rocks in their houses. It's an announcement to
I see.
everyone to feel safe because I'm not sick. And so you want to say it in a positive way and you want it to be public, right? And so it's sort of like a birthday greeting, sort of, di ba? Or self-congratulatory.
Yeah.
But I think what you're avoiding there is you're avoiding the discrimination, the
Correct.
stigma that comes with that. No? So
Yeah.
I guess
Because
my
no,
question is,
yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
good, yeah, good, good. The fact that you have to do that, you're recognizing there's stigma, right? The fact that you say they have to say
Yes.
that, okay, I'm negative. You recognize that there's stigma in the event that you're infected, right? So that's why you're
Right.
doing that. Anyway, go on, JJ. Go on, JJ.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess for me that's really the heart of the parang
Right.
data privacy conundrum. And I think what is unfortunate about COVID is you can argue that even very educated people don't know enough about the disease, and what more or less those who have less information, and so people act on the basis of fear. So there have been instances, I believe, where somebody is already a recovered COVID patient, uh, sorry, he recovered already, so out of the hospital, but the COVID result came days after. And the person was already at home. And so up to that point, they didn't know whether it was COVID or not. But anyway, he was home, he was recovering and isolating. And then it turns out that the test results were positive. And it was disclosed to the barangay captain. And as a result, the barangay captain sends an ambulance to pick up this individual. Not only him, but everyone in his family and in another household. And it creates this big spectacle for everyone to see. And that's I think that's really it's hard to say. I mean, I know from a data privacy standpoint, we want to avoid discrimination, but I wonder also if people are going to say, "I'm sorry, but we're very fearful and we don't know." And if your privacy is at risk, I think that's just the casualty for collective defense mechanism. What would you say to that?
That is very interesting because I myself am a privy to that because in our village in Parañaque, and I happen to be the unfortunately, I'm the president of our village. So every time an ambulance would come in, right, our ambulance or even a van that will deliver, let's say, somebody who passed away to the funeral home, immediately the villagers are panicking, sending email, calling our administration office. Is that COVID related? Right? Is it COVID related? So again, and that's the reason why we should be more discerning on how we inform the people. Let's say, for example, NPC has been quite strict about this. If there's somebody, if you're an employer, let's say for an employer, you're not allowed to broadcast the name of the employee unless those people are authorized to know that. No, at the start, yes. No, at the start of the pandemic, remember there's this big company in BGC. Okay, we want to disclose that somebody from our among our employees is COVID positive. No, that started panic also in BGC. A lot of people demanding, is that our building? Is that our company? And so on and so forth, right? So the feelings of the collective, we can do anything about that. Now we can do anything about that. But with respect to the privacy of the COVID patient, that's something that we need to address. And we fail to do so, we don't address it properly, we might be held liable. Because if we say that, because we can do anything about the feelings of the collective. But with respect to this, if we disclose the identity of the patient, then we'll be legally liable. But nothing. But if you take into consideration the feelings of the collective, if you don't address that, I don't think you'll be held liable at all. Right? It's really more. So you have to weigh in. You have to weigh in, right? Well, for example, in our village, we don't say, okay, if there's a COVID patient, right? We would say, okay, we'd inform the community. We have a COVID patient. Let's pray for their health, and so on and so forth. But we would have a jail description. Let's say of the quadrant, but not even the street, right? Baka mamaya magturan sila doon. Quadrant. And then, of course, you would inform them. This also protect the privacy of the individual involved. And then the homeowners, the villagers would tell, okay, so that's fine. And as long as it's contained and you give the assurance that you're doing something, you know about it. And then we also make a declaration that's been reported to the barangay. The barangay is taking care of them. So, in other words, you cannot leave them hanging for information. I think you need to assure them that that we're taking care of this. The barangay is all over it, and of course you have the Department of Health is also aware of the situation.
Yes, it's no. I mean, I just think that it's such a unique situation that we're in that I think it's likely that people will make mistakes, and I know it's very hard for those who are affected, but I would like to think that I guess a lot of understanding needs to happen
Right.
all around, di ba? Parang everyone is put in a very, very difficult, and when people are put in difficult situations, bad things are going to happen. So everyone is
Correct.
trying their best. I think
Right.
that's the situation we're in. So so interesting.
Jay.
You were talking. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Before, there's a question here. Is it okay if I
Yeah, go
read
ahead.
this? Okay, I really
Sure,
want to address it because this really
sure.
really I have my personal experience here.
Okay.
So this is from
Oh
Bringuel.
yes,
I hope I pronounce your name correctly. Do we
saw that in the
need to
chat.
disclose all our cases to the LGU if the employees already informing the barangay, right? The barangay health office.
Right.
Okay, so I have exactly the same question, right, to an LGU health officer.
Okay.
They said that you have to disclose that as well. Why? Because I think the employer, between the employer and the LGU. I think the employer is in the better position to know, right? To know what happened to the employee. Now,
Right.
this is my question also, right? Let's say we have a work from home employee who never visited, who never visited the workplace, right? Who never
Okay.
visited the workplace. Should Are we required to report that person to as part of the contact tracing report we need to for the LGU for LGU purposes? I remember told we that's still covered. Maybe that was validated by the Department of Labor. Even
Hmm.
if the person is working from home, right? It's still part of the employer's disclosure. There's the contact tracing. Again, I think then again, it's really more of the base, probably more of efficiency
Yes.
rather than
But yes.
than anything else, right? So that the LGU can perform their contact tracing, their own contact tracing. Okay, so this person is reported to be a
Right.
close contact or a patient. Then the LGU will do its contact tracing with respect to that particular barangay, right? Particular barangay. Because again,
Yes.
yeah, the employees would say they have informed, but there's no way to validate that, right? It's really hard to validate that. So then again, remember at the start, only the Department of Health and LGUs are supposedly the ones
Correct.
conducting
Yeah.
the contact tracing. In fact,
Contact tracing. Yes.
I even validated that with the National Privacy Commission. Then
Mm.
and they had several bulletins before. Only the LGUs, the Department of Health
Yes.
are allowed to do contact tracing. But later on, yun na, lumalabas sa mga Department of Labor, DTI, mga workplace guidelines that now the employees, and may form pa sila, you're
That's
now
right.
required to inform the barangay. Now I ask them, it's not a question, okay, so our employee, let's say, lives in Pasig, right? The employee lives in Pasig, barangay in Pasig, but the workplace is in Makati. How do you do the reporting? Apparently, you also report where the person lives and also the workplace, because
Okay.
the LGU in the workplace will, well, supposedly will do their own contact tracing, while the LGU of the where the employee resides will conduct its own contact tracing activities with respect to
Yes.
the barangay where that person belongs.
But I guess the less work if you report to them that this person was work from home because there's no contact. Essentially,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
of course. Oh,
It ends
you
na,
have
no?
to know that, right? Yeah,
Right.
that's really a well, that's again another point, right, which I like to air out.
Mm.
We need to be clear that the workplace is not the only source of COVID infections, right? Even
Okay.
if you're working from home at the get-go, you can still be a victim of COVID.
Right.
You can still be a patient. That's why we really be careful with that. Um, the reason why I'm saying is because sometimes BPOs and other workplaces are tagged, oh, that's a source of infection, right?
Yeah.
That's not really the case. And regardless, even if you have all these robust policies and procedures in place to prevent infection, and BPOs are always the targets of inspection by DOLE, Department of Labor, because
Right.
they can only be seen. Siguro mga Department of Labor employees, they are the one of the first employers that would easily inspect would be the BPO. If they have a list of
Right.
employers, akila, BPO, ito nasa listahan ko, let's go there. Unahin nila yan.
Okay.
regardless of the policies that you have, the sanitation procedures that you have,
Right.
the problem there is, of course, the behavior
Mm,
of the employee outside of their premises. And this is a common complaint among BPOs when the employee is outside of the workplace, you don't have any control with the
right. Right.
behavior.
So
So that's
that's
really,
not a BPO risk. That's just a general risk because these
yeah,
individuals would have acted the same way anyway.
exactly. And
Right.
unfortunately, and this happened to some BPOs, after the work shift, some agents went to some gipsal to have, yeah,
Ah,
to
okay.
have a meal. Eh,
Right.
sama-sama na sila doon. And that's why when the BPOs did the contact tracing, many employees, many agents from the same account, you know, are became COVID
Positive.
positive. That's behavior outside of the
Ah,
workplace.
yeah. Actually, I remember early in the pandemic when we were ECQ, I believe some of the BPOs housed their employees in hotels in Makati, and so my understanding was that the employer really has no control of what the employees are doing after work, and neither should they. But what happens is that there seems to be a lot of contact between them back in the early
Right.
days. So I don't know if that added to the infection, but I guess I mean one way of looking at it is I think the makeup of the average BPO employee is quite young. So I guess even if they
Yeah,
do get
millennial.
infected, yeah, millennials. So the health risk to them is not so big, no. But there's a question here about sleeping quarters. So do you provide sleeping and resting quarters, and how do you ensure that COVID-19 safety measures are observed in sleeping and resting quarters?
Okay. Okay, that's a good one. But hindi na siya privacy. But of course, let me answer that.
Yeah.
We still have sleeping quarters, right? But of course, there'll be social distancing already. And like before, when in a sleeping room would have bunk beds, and it will no longer, it will be, let's say, tabi-tabi. No longer is the case. So you're now separate at least more than a meter or more, right, from
Oh,
each
okay.
other. You no longer allow bunk beds, and very limited only. If, for example, sleeping area will accommodate six, you will only be allowed two. But in our case, we have facilities already closed down. Let's say, for example, we have a gym before. Now we no longer have we still have the gym, but it's been closed for more than 6 months, right? But at least for the BPO, I cannot speak for the BPOs. At least for our BPO,
Yes.
we have an army of housekeeping personnel doing
Yes.
inspection on a regular
Right.
basis. Right? For example, if you're in a pantry, if you get up, somebody would just go there and disinfect everything.
Right.
Even our pantries, right? Our pantries are really more of a separated by small tables each. And like before, you have tables, then you have four chairs there. Now you will probably have one chair there to
Right.
accommodate an employee. So we have those measures in place to avoid contamination as much as possible.
Okay. That's good. That's good. Let me see. Uh, let's see. What are the best? Okay. So thank you for the very informative presentation. This is from Angelita Senorin. Thank you for the very informative presentation. I just want to ask, what are the actions or best remedies for BPO workers being discriminated against, especially in this time of pandemic?
Okay.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's really more. You have to have a and BPOs are usually familiar in this approach, right? You talk to, okay, definitely, you need a report first to the employees about the discrimination. And then once you have the report, then you ask the HR, they could do something about it. And then the HR would probably have, and then most BPOs are familiar with the respective LGUs. They have good relations with the respective LGUs. I'll not be surprised if they would just approach the head of the LGU, the mayor, or the governor. Hey, we have a problem like this and discrimination. Maybe you can help us out, right? There's nothing will prevent the BPO. And we did this before. We did so many times before that we would talk to the mayor, we talk to the governor, and then they will be the ones who actually be talking to their own barangay, talking about privacy. You should be limiting our contact tracing to those actually in the contact list, right? So those probably uh, outside probably of the box approach to ensure that discrimination is avoided, especially in the communities, right? So I'm happy with the question because number one, it only shows that in the workplace, there's not really much discrimination going on because it's really been probably the maturity of employee of the privacy maturity of the individuals in the workplace. But then again, when you go back to the communities, maybe it's because it's closer to home. That's the reason why employees who are not even close contacts are subjected to discrimination because these barangay officials, I know probably because as as somebody who talks to barangay officials a lot, they tend to be political in their reaction. They tend to, and it's not a bad thing, right? They need to pander to their constituents, and that's why when they approach a situation, they think of the collective first before the individual. Because again, they have to pander to their position. That's why
they're politicians after all.
Exactly. So that's why they need to act on it. Sometimes, shoot first before aiming. Is that right? So that's the
shoot first and ask questions later.
Yeah. Shoot first. That's sometimes like, and that's being that I'm saying that figuratively, right? Figurative, not literally.
Right. So that's interesting that there's a follow-on question here from somebody who you might know, someone named Jenny Marshall. So she asks,
according to the NPC.
Yeah, I know. I'm just kidding. So according to the NPC advisory, health info should only be shared to DOH and partner agencies. And she's asking, since LGUs are required to submit COVID reports, can we refuse? Sabi niya. And if you can't refuse, can you limit the information that you provide? Do you think that's something that, we're not asking what Alorica does. We're asking in general.
No, in general. You have to remember that they have the LGUs have their health officers as well, right? And as far as the DOH is concerned, they have basically authorized. In fact, the DLG is even part of the IATF. So these are the agencies that have been, let's say, authorized by the Department of Health in terms of assisting its contact tracing efforts. So definitely, from my perspective, the LGUs are let's say would fall under authorized units,
agencies to collect.
Agencies. Of course, definitely, it's really up to you right now on how to limit the information. But I've seen those contact tracing reports. The contact tracing report of one LGU will be different from the contact tracing report of another LGU. There's really no consistency, right?
I see. Interesting.
In the contact tracing. Yeah, that's true. So, to the point of Jen, is also one of the recognized data privacy experts like the BPO industry. I understand where she's coming from. And being in an industry, in a company which is really heavy into healthcare, so she knows her stuff, right? And basically what she's coming because in the US, where the company is really is headquartered, health data is really sacred, right?
Yes.
Really sacred, and that's why many BPOs, especially the our counterparts in the US, are really quite surprised when they see this number of data which we are required or being requested to disclose to the LGUs, right? So
there's an interesting question follow-up, which I think is a good follow-up, and I think it's a difficult question. It sounds like an easy question, but I think it's a difficult question to answer. It comes from Christopher Manalang, and he asks, how do they assure, or how are we assured, I think, as ordinary citizens that the data collected are really destroyed in 30 days, which I think is a larger issue of, how can we really
Yeah.
trust the controllers that they're going to do what they're supposed to do because the law is there. What do you
Right.
think
Right.
about that? I mean,
Okay.
that's
So that
yeah,
is a fair question. That's a good. That's a now that we're talking about how to operationalize the law,
trust.
right?
Yeah,
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 exactly. That's how you have. And remember, uh, company should already have a disposal policy in place as part of
mm,
its accountability, right? And the NPC requires that accountability in place. And that's why when the NPC would audit employers, they would look at this policy, including retention and disposal policies. Now, if the policy is not being operationalized, meaning it's only paper compliance, that's another thing.
yeah,
Me, for example, I cannot guarantee that all employees are really doing their what they're required to do in terms of disposal. But of course, that's really on the employer. They get audited. They have to prove.
right.
They have to prove there should be supporting evidence that you're disposing of
Yes,
of the um, of the um, of the data. Let's say, for
that's
example,
right.
there's you say a certificate from the public facilities team. Let's say we talk about paper documents. Okay, on this certain date, we certified that this data has been destroyed, right, or
Right.
shredded, or something like that. Or for example, it's the IT team that would is in charge of digital information, like through health service. Definitely, they would be you can ask them or they can certify that the so date every 30 days we delete the data. Well, and of course, and definitely, right, from the perspective of the from the IT, we try to delete the data as soon as possible, because if it consumes storage space, right?
Right. Right.
So they would rather, from the practical perspective, would rather destroy it than retain it after
That's right.
30 days.
Oo. Well, I was just going to say, inisip ko rin, baka one thing that he can do if Mr. Manalang is concerned, I mean, he can, theoretically, he could send a letter to the controller and say,
Yeah, yeah,
what data of mine do you have? And can you prove to me that my data has been
yeah.
deleted? And then,
Yeah, definitely.
di ba? And,
Yeah,
pag hindi ka, you don't get a satisfactory answer, then you go to our friends at the NPC, right? And then
right.
they'll help
And
you
yeah,
out. So maybe Mr. Manalang, you can try that if you're not happy with the answer that you get from whoever you no, you can do that. Okay, so there's another question here. This is again one, parang I like it's short, but it's I think quite difficult. Are there government established rules regarding maximum retention period? Uh,
with respect
Go ahead.
to well, okay, with respect to health data,
Yeah.
in fact, I never realized this. I was just relying on the workplace guidelines issued by the Department of Labor and DTI. So there's apparently, and just read this to the various contact tracing forms that I accomplished the other day when I went to Alabang Town Center.
Right, right.
Uh, it stated there, in accordance with the policy of National Archives, right? They should be
Archives.
destroyed after 30 days. Yeah, I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. So
Okay.
okay, so definitely, so okay, but seriously, you can look at it from different layers, right? If, for
Yeah.
example, you're an employee, and then there's no, you're not a close contact, then
Mm,
definitely the employer should already be destroying or deleting it after 30 days, as required by the guidelines, right? But of course,
yes.
if you're a close contact, or if you're a COVID patient, then definitely the threshold for retention is expected to be longer
Longer.
than
Yeah.
than 30 days, right? Than 30 days. Of course, you have to process HMO
Correct. Correct.
benefits. So expectedly, it will be more than 30 days. Now,
Yes.
of course, you cannot retain it. It depends on the company policies on retention.
Yes.
So that would be different, right? So it could be a year or more if you're still an
Right.
employee of the company, because you cannot blame the company from retain the data because later you might be filing complaints, and then if
Yes.
it's related to health data, they have to keep the data, right?
Right. Right.
As far as
So that
practicable.
right. So that really that really parang hints. Well, my next question, kasi the thought that popped in my head is, I think a lot of the data that you are collecting now, I mean, right now, of course, the focus now is, as you said, protecting against discrimination, protecting the COVID patient, as well as balancing that with the interests of everyone else in the workplace. But I think after, in that bright tomorrow that we're all hoping will come sooner or later when we can finally, emerge from our caves. I'm literally in one. Uh, and once that happens, a lot of this data might actually be very valuable for research purposes. I mean, in terms of like, tracing the pathway, diba, of this disease and infection, and that would be very interesting to see in the context of, say, a BPO. And I wonder if it makes any sense from a archival standpoint to sort of take it out of the online system, but you keep it in a parang tape version. You know what I mean? It's like
Right.
maybe data disk, optical disk, and then but you don't use it for anything else other than potentially, for example, a research that could be conducted in that field. And of
Yeah.
course respecting privacy protocols, the researchers, because this data might actually be very very valuable in fighting the next pandemic.
Yeah.
So
Okay. So
yeah,
public health, right? It's a consideration. It's like one of the
right,
exceptions in processing health data of individuals. So okay. So there are layers to that perspective, right? Of course,
right,
it has to be the data be anonymized or de-identified, right? To be
right.
you to be in an aggregate form so that you can no longer identify the individuals that would be the source of that information. However, if the research is more specific, let's say for example you have a liver problem and this is the impact of data of
Mm,
COVID to you, and then there's not much information available except for these individuals, then definitely in
right.
that case, um, that's a time when you have to ask the consent of the
Data
patient,
subject. Yeah,
data
yeah.
subject, right? So that's why I think that's how you would approach it from for say, a healthcare perspective or from the doctor's medical profession. So if it's an aggregate for research, they identify, I think that's fine. They have no issues
Oo.
from data privacy
Anonymized.
perspective.
Right,
Anonymized, exactly.
right,
But
right,
if, for
right.
example, if it's going to be, you have to be very specific, and some research would be exactly, they have to be as specific as possible so they can produce the right vaccine for this potential.
Oh,
Because for
yeah.
example, you want a vaccine that will not would have less side effects as much as possible to those
Yes.
who have underlying conditions, right?
Right, right,
So
right.
they may be very very specific. Um, in that case, you have to have a consent of the individual.
Okay, so there's a question that just came in regarding the potential repurposing of collected contact tracing study. Uh, isn't that a direct violation of the Data Privacy Act, using data beyond what was declared purpose? Is there any legal method to allow repurposing of such data, even if it is in anonymized form? So I think this guy is asking, sandali lang, you got my data because it was for contact tracing. Now you kept that data, now you're using it for medical research. Uh, since I was the one who brought that up, my first response to that, well, if it's in an anonymized form, there's no data privacy concern because technically it falls outside of personal information kasi we already don't know the identity of the data subject. So, but I think the second one is research. I think for research purposes, there's a broad exemption. But I do
Yeah.
understand there's the issue there is that why did you still keep it, right? For that purpose beyond what was declared. And yeah, I do understand. But this is something that I think right now we want to be protective, but there could be something later. I mean, they're finding out things. Apparently, the people who've had COVID, especially even young people, they're getting these side effects. Have you heard of this? Some of
Oh.
them are getting
Oh yeah,
heart disease,
it's having,
cardiac
yeah, yeah,
arrest.
yeah.
Yeah. So all of these things might be something that we can't study now because we're too
Right.
busy finding focusing on other things, but later maybe researchers will need the data. And unfortunately, that data might not be available. And it should be interesting how it plays out.
Yeah.
But I mean, I can see exactly where it's coming from.
Yeah,
Wow, this
yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
go ahead.
No, no, tama rin siya. Tama rin siya from the perspective of the data subject. I want to invoke my rights. In fact, if you can really identify yourself, though you're not named, and you say, oh, that's me, then definitely you have rights to exercise, to be exercised at that point, right? But if again, to the point of JJ, it's really anonymous. You can't really identify yourself, especially if it's the public or the government or the DOH, for example, gets this aggregated data, anonymized, etc., and then for research purposes, then I think scientific research is even a exemption in terms of the law, right? So they given specific exemptions or benefits under the law. So in that case, it'd be hard to exercise the right to object. Right? I think if I'm data subject, if I will wish to object to that. So in that case, it'd be hard to enforce whatever right you may have, especially when it's already anonymized and de-identified, regardless of the original intention of the contact tracing. Because you never know. You never know talaga. Right? Once it's out there with the government and they repurpose it, then that's something that really need to be studied after this pandemic. And there are a lot of issues coming out in the open triggered by this pandemic in terms of privacy situation is concerned.
Okay, there's somebody here who is holds a master's degree in hospital administration from UP, and she works at a hospital in the north, and she's talking about national archives. She's saying as far as the national records, as far as these records are concerned, the National Archives of the Philippines deals with retention period and disposal. And they do give a certificate about the disposal of records, and there is a law on records management. That's RA 9470, according to her, is the legal mandate of the National Archives. So, and said that together with the COA, they observe the actual disposal after the National Archives of the Philippines issues a certificate of disposal. So she's saying that there is a protocol that they follow because she works in sounds like they work in a government hospital.
Right.
Yeah, that's peculiar in this particular case because it's healthcare. It's a very it's a highly regulated. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. That also.
Magandang interaction from the audience. So let me see. A friend of mine actually was from London, just logged in. Also, she just said hi. So thank you, Trina. So we got people all over how many time zones already. So it's good. So there's so maybe ito na yung parang maybe the last topic that we can have, and then we can go to I can ask you for your parang parting shots. And he's talking about Estonia. He said Estonian principle. I've never heard of this. Okay, so is it possible in the Philippines to have an Estonian principle of one time only logging in without having logging in multiple times? And I think that that's sort of related to the issue of facial recognition and biometric collection of biometric information, where you go in, your face identifies you, and then it lets you in, or it allows all sorts of monitoring, not just it could be they could track you. Facial recognition against CCTV. They say, oh, you were in this place, you were that place. You took 10 minutes to go to the restroom. What are your thoughts on that?
Facial recognition technology.
Yes.
That's a very, very tricky subject. So I wanted to avoid
I want to avoid. Okay.
No, it's okay. But it's okay.
Right.
Okay, so facial recognition technology. There's a lot of issues concerning facial recognition technology. Some jurisdictions find it intrusive, privacy intrusive, especially if the purpose is it's just for productivity, productivity use. When I look what facial recognition technology is, right? So it's not just about you having a photo in the system. So you have you'll be required to have different photos, right? They have take you. They
Ah,
have nodes all over your face and all that, and that'll
right,
be stored by the system. So
right.
when you're logged in, for example, when you go around areas where you have a facial recognition technology in place, they could easily uh, ident- identify you.
Right,
So
right.
with respect to uh, monitoring, let's say monitoring at the workplace. As a while ago, I mentioned that monitoring for productivity reasons is really be difficult to address, especially have the NPC saying you need to have less intrusive privacy, less privacy intrusive means to monitor you. Um, what about, say, using facial recognition technology for security reasons? And I think
Right.
there are many companies, not just in the Philippines, looking into that. In fact, it's already operational in
Yes.
other jurisdiction using facial technology. So whenever you're, and let's say in the case of this auditing firm,
Mm.
abroad, which is really being chided for using this technology. So they're using facial technology, facial recognition technology. So when you're to monitor the face of the employee, so much
Oh, okay.
so, so much so that when a person goes out of the probably the purview of the monitor, the screen,
Mm.
and when he comes back, there's a question: where did you go? Right?
Okay.
And the reasoning of that company. Now we're part of the financial industry, heavily regulated by the state, and we
Right, right.
need this kind of technology. So then again, if we talk about data security, we really need to be careful because that certain forms of technology to monitor you
Yeah.
might be allowed in a certain sense, but I'm not sure about facial recognition technology. Simply because although it's biometric data,
Yes.
right? Biometric data, and right now the Data Privacy Act doesn't state that biometric data is sensitive personal information,
Right.
right?
Oh,
It's
yeah,
not
yeah,
stated
yeah.
there. It's not stated there.
That's
So
right.
is that
That's right. They want that
now
in, no?
exactly now, man? So now that you have biometric data, and for the use of being used for facial recognition technology, and for the purpose of data security, which
Right.
is this is always a legitimate interest of the company. Will you now allow that? Right? We
Yes.
now allow that. It's
Okay.
not 70% innovation. Don't need the consent. You don't need. There's no need for legal obligation. No need for vital interest. But can you now use that, since yes, it is classified person non-sensitive personal information? Can
Mm.
you now use facial recognition uh, technology if the legitimate purpose is to secure the data? So you would know, for example, this is the person who has authorized access to the
Yes,
data in the
yes,
computer,
yes,
right?
yes.
And interesting enough, and the reason why we need to probably have another discussion on this. I don't think we
Mm.
can resolve this in this forum.
Right, right. Ito.
The NPC issued an advisory on the use of CCTV,
Yes.
right? And I invite everyone to grab a copy of that CCTV advisory, read it, and look at the portion of legitimate interest. The advisory says that yes, you can use CCTV to monitor your employees insofar as they handle the company assets of the employer. So by analogy, can we use the principles in that advisory in putting, let's say, a webcam or even another or AI or facial recognition technology at the at the how at the in a work from home environment,
Right.
right? Based on the principle that okay, we need to protect our data, right, from access. We need to preserve it for CIA purposes, so the confidentiality, integrity, availability. So that being said, will
You know,
there
so
be more viewing?
yeah,
Yeah,
I
there
know.
will be. Wait,
I have something to share lang with you. It's interesting. It just occurred to
yeah,
me. So years
yeah,
ago,
done.
siguro mga maybe almost 10 years ago, I was at a client site, and it was early in the morning, around 9 in the morning, and then they said that there was an incident maybe 2 hours before, where the guard had an argument with the janitor, who was a female, right? And supposedly the guard hit the female janitor, and so they had CCTV back then in the premises. So we went and took a look, right, at the CCTV footage. And what was when you look at it, it's a little disturbing when I saw it there, because you will really see yung force that was used by the guard on this individual. And what was interesting, that made me look back at that, because initially when we were approached and the story was told, it looked as if maybe she's the girl was just overreacting, to the level of no the hit. But when you saw the video, but there's no questions asked. Talagang very clear, excessive. The force that he was quite excessive. And so in a sense, I mean, that was a situation where the CCTV put out good information, and that wasn't done. The funny thing was, the CCTV wasn't intended to be used between employees. It was meant to be used for outsiders who violate or trespass the office premises. So I thought
Right.
it was interesting. Now, even if they had a consent form, it might not even they wouldn't have considered, between employees, but it did serve that purpose. So I thought that sometimes, the thing about CCTV or any kind of data collection tool, it collects more information, and sometimes that information may be used for other things. And it's a tricky thing, but I do agree that, if your basis for putting the machine in is for security, maybe you shouldn't use it for things like proving other kinds of misconduct. You know what I mean? Where it might
Yes.
inadvertently catch other kinds of misconduct, when it's supposed to be really to secure property, or to prevent, say, crimes, right, committed against property and safety, right? But other things perhaps should be taken out. The other thing I was concerned about, facial recognition, that it just occurred to me, is that in certain cities in Metro Manila, the LGU itself has a lot of CCTV footage, and they may not have biometric data of people within their zone, but if the BPOs in their zone have biometric data on those individuals, what if they say judges start issuing warrants requiring disclosure of biometric data, so that the CCTV data can be used to, say, solve a crime or a series of crimes. So in a case sakali, if it's can you imagine if it's I'm thinking of a riot, right? So people are destroying property, and then they want to know, are any of these guys potentially BPO employees who
Yeah.
went down, you know? So you saw that footage in the US, about the riots. I'm thinking,
Right.
some cop is going to end up spending all night play pause, sino yan, di ba? And facial recognition information is
Yeah.
something that will make it very, very easy for him to do. So on that note, I guess I'd like to ask, first of all, I'd like to thank you for being our guest here. It's been a very, very informative session. So we've done, this is, I think, our fourth event on data privacy. We've had Don Di Mapas, and we've had Clarice Giroux, Chairman Liboro was here, and then we had Jam Jacob as well. But your perspective, I think, is quite relevant insofar as you're focusing directly on COVID, and I think we're very happy for the thoughts and the time that you've provided us. And would you have any closing remarks for our viewers?
Yeah. Oh, first things first, I'd like to thank my kids for allowing me to use their Lego toys for my presentation. So if you see the photos in my presentation, this came from my kids. So these are their Legos that I momentarily sequestered for this presentation. Okay, so probably my message to everyone here is that the right to privacy is something we really need to be serious on. or about, right? Because it has serious implications to our rights. And if you look at the reasons why we have one, it can be traced to the Holocaust per se. Then it is something that we have to cherish as a right, something we need to embody, something that we need to inhale on daily basis. Breathing, breathe out. We should have breathing in privacy, breathing out privacy. It should be part of our lifestyle. The reason why I'm saying that's because as part of the BPO industry before, I know that some of our IDs for the convenience of employees, our IDs before would include social security numbers, tax identification numbers, so that when they go to the banks, it will be easy for them to do bank transactions. And thankfully, with the era or the dawn of data privacy, people are having, the people are more aware of their rights to privacy. Slowly, we're becoming mature. But I'm hoping that that only just be a few individuals will be exercising their right to privacy. But of course, we need to have everyone be aware and informed of the right to privacy, because we need to raise the privacy maturity not only of the individuals but all at the society level as well, right? And then again, um, privacy, at least for me, is really a now it's like a revolution than a evolution. That's in our situation right now. That's why we have to be in a better place of probably hopefully with the as a result of the pandemic, we'll be more aware of our rights as individuals on how we protect our data. And then again, I'm hoping, JJ, that you can still continue to have and host this kind of sessions, because this will be definitely a big help to that to our goal of raising the privacy maturity of society in general. And thank you again for having me here in this forum of yours.
Thank you very, very much. So I failed to mention earlier about I mean, sorry, you noted about data privacy evolution and revolution, and in a sense, what I find, or the way I look at data privacy in the Philippines, he's John's attorney Bellow is actually correct. It's a revolution in the sense it's earth shaking. We didn't have time to grow up. We had to grow up in a very short period of time. But that wouldn't have happened if we didn't have a lot of champions or revolutionaries, right? People who took up the cause and say, we're going to do this, and bootstrap and learn fast and share information. One of the nice things about the data privacy community is that it's a very selfless community. People aren't hiding things from each other. People are sharing things. People are learning from each other. It's a very nice community to be a part of. If you're young and you're interested in having a career, data privacy is actually one of those careers that you should go into. If you're in a company and they're forcing you to be a data protection officer, don't feel that you lost the lottery. It's actually a good career move. This is something that in the future will be very, very big growth areas and opportunities. And then there are people, people like Attorney Bello, who are here early and sharing their expertise, and we are grateful for the time that he spent with us today. So that closes our session today. I'd like to invite you to attend and sign up for next week's session. We have two sessions next week. One is a repeat of the one we were supposed to have last week. We'll have next week, but we have two sessions next week. The first one is on virtual arbitration. That's on online arbitration. So if you're interested in ADR and digital ADR, we have actually two international guests, one from Singapore, Miss Janice Lee, and another one from Paris, Dr. Maria Hauser Morel. And then on Friday, we will have a discussion on what is affecting us, internet and internet availability, open access in data transmission law. And we will have Grace Mirandira Santos and Roy Ibay, who's VP for Regulatory Affairs of Smart Communication, and Professor Oli Reyes from the UP Law Center. So we hope you can join us. If you want a certificate for today, please sign up at dpp.ph, and we will send you a link. Thank you for everyone for attending today. We'd like to end it here. Thank you, and have a nice weekend, and have a safe a safe weekend.